It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Saqqara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Saqqara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes, though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane. But this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oupart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only example of such a revolutionary concept. In 1901, a group of divers retrieved the Antikythera mechanism from an underwater shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's been dubbed the world's first analog computer, and it's currently dated around 100 BCE. The bronze mechanism could tell the position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, as well as the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, and even the speed at which the moon moves through the sky. No one's sure who used it and how or where it was made, but it's obvious that it's extremely precise and way too advanced for its time. The first flushing toilets in the world were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Just kidding. The ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with this brilliant invention at the same time, around 4,000 years ago. The plumbing and sanitation were so well done that no one managed to design anything better until 2,000 years later. One ancient Minoan lavatory was discovered at the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat set over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop reservoir to an underground sewer. Other varieties got water from jugs. Only the super rich people could afford all this glory. So if you wanted to shop for real estate back then, the flushing toilet would be a telltale sign you were in the rich neighborhood. Automated doors became a cool, seemingly new invention back in 1931. But the technology behind them is actually much older. Think the 1st century CE old. Mathematician and engineer Heron of Alexandria came up with a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. To bring it into action, you need to light a fire to produce heat. There was a brass pot under the fire, half filled with water. The inventor connected the brass pot to containers that acted as weights. When the fire was burning, the water moved into the containers. They went down and pulled the ropes. It was nothing like a supermarket door that opens in front of you before you even have time to think. Heron's door took hours to open, and there was no way to stop the process. That's why they only opened the doors once a day before people entered the temple, to add some mysticism at the temple during ceremonies. Spooky. Looks like the first ever battery was invented in Baghdad around 2,000 years ago. A German archaeologist found this oval-shaped clay jar in 1938. Scientists are still not sure what purpose it served and who exactly invented it. There is a theory that it was used for electroplating objects with precious metals. When they filled it with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced around 1 volt of electricity. Another theory says it was a vessel for sacred scrolls. Would you like to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself? In 1508, he invented a glass lens with a funnel on one side. You were supposed to wear it with water inside to improve your vision. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So, around a century later, French scientist René Descartes decided to improve the idea and make the cornea contact the future lenses. Contacts because they contact your eyes, get it? The glass tube with liquid did help improve vision, but blinking was sadly impossible. 2.5 centuries later, new technologies in the glass industry let scientists design contacts that would fit in the eye and even let the wearer blink. Thanks, guys! Still, those lenses were made of heavy blown glass and didn't let the eye breathe. About 50 years later, contacts became plastic, lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant, but still covering the entire eye. And then, in 1948, an English optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and figured out they'd still be in place even if they covered only the cornea. Imagine you're living in 19th century London and need to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days to get there by ship. So when delivery time went from days to hours in 1858, it was a true sensation. The first message was sent by Queen Victoria herself. It was all made possible thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, running under the ocean. Sadly, the new cool invention only lasted a few weeks. It took years to bring it back to life.
Consider the Great Pyramids, one of the original 7 wonders of the world and the only one that still exists today. Did you know that the pyramids of Giza weren't the only pyramids out there? And they weren't even the first ones. First, there were the pretty good pyramids, but they didn't catch on. Nah, I made that up. Back to the story. In ancient Egypt, it was believed that kings were chosen by gods to serve on earth as their mediators. In the afterlife, they were expected to become gods themselves. The pyramid complex was built to make sure that the king had everything they might need in the afterlife. The complex included the pyramid, a palace, and temples. The tomb in the pyramid, where the king was buried, was filled with many things they might need, like furniture, food, and gold vessels. Actually, the first pyramid had been built 80 years before the first pyramid of Giza appeared. Overall, there were around 100 of them. Some weren't finished though, since the construction took a while and not every pharaoh lived long enough to see the end of the construction. And now let's talk about the construction itself. The biggest of the pyramids of Giza is as tall as a 40-story building. So how on earth did they manage to build a structure that massive 5,000 years ago, long before machines and other equipment appeared? Well, let's figure it out. So Pharaoh Khufu ascended the throne around 2575 BCE, and his architects started the construction of the oldest and biggest of the pyramids of Giza. He figured that over 2 million limestone blocks had to be used to build the pyramid, each weighing around 2.5 tons, around the weight of a rhino. The architect wanted to finish the construction in 20 years. To make it possible, a stone had to be carried and pushed into place every 4 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year, except leap year. So obviously, a lot of workers were needed to make it happen. Many believe that it was enslaved people who worked at the pyramid's construction site, but that's not true. Workers came from all over Egypt to contribute to the project. All in all, around 25,000 of them. The Egyptians were doing all kinds of work, starting with manual labor and crafting tools to administrative work. They all worked around 10 hours a day. They were housed and well fed, and they were overall living a more comfortable life than an average Egyptian could afford at that time. Supposedly, the builders lived in a nearby temporary city and were a highly organized community with a strong leader. The pyramids seemed to be designed to align with the points on a compass, and their sides symbolized the rays of the sun. But back at that time, there were no compasses. Ancient Egyptians figured out the directions themselves and with amazing precision. To align the pyramids, they used 2 constellations. The construction site was arranged on the west bank of the Nile River. This also had a symbolic meaning. Just like the sun sets in the west, life sets in the west as well. The second pyramid of Giza was for Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khafre. It's a bit smaller, but this one has the famous noseless statue of the Sphinx. Of course, originally it had a nose. I would tell you what happened to it, but it's still a mystery, and no one knows for sure. Sphinxes have the body of a lion and the head of a human. They were considered guardians of important areas. This famous Sphinx, also pronounced Sphinx, has the head of Pharaoh Khafre and is guarding his pyramid, facing the sunrise. The Sphinx is one of the biggest and oldest statues in the world. Originally, it not only had a nose, but was also painted. Scientists have discovered traces of the red color of its face. So, most likely, the Sphinx was painted red. There are also remains of yellow and blue color on its body. The statue definitely wasn't boring. Till around 1800, the Sphinx was buried up to its shoulders until an adventurer with a team of 160 men dug it out. But let's get back to the construction. The workers, of course, needed stone blocks. There were 2 main places where people could get these stones. One source was close to the construction site, but that fossil-lined yellow stone was only suitable for the pyramid's interior. The limestone blocks for the exterior were hauled from 8 miles away on 30-foot-long sleds. Apparently, it wasn't too hard to pull them. The sand mixed with the right amount of water was pretty slick, and 10 people could move a sled even with a rock weighing so much. Surprisingly, cutting off a block of limestone wasn't the biggest problem. When in the ground, it was soft and could be split relatively easy. But after getting exposed to the air, limestone hardens. So the most difficult part was to shape the blocks. That step was crucial because the smallest inaccuracies could lead to the whole pyramid collapsing. So, okay, those limestones were mined, carried on a sled, shaped, and then what? How could they be put into place? Well, this is still a mystery. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of a ramp system that dates back around the time the pyramids were being built. So historians have come to the consensus that, most likely, the Egyptians designed a unique ramp system to move and pull huge stone blocks. The most common opinion is that there were several ramps around the pyramid. There probably was a central ramp with 2 staircases on each side of it built over the pyramid stones. The ramp was growing as the pyramid was getting higher. People might have been walking up the stairs, pulling up stones on wooden sleds. But this is just one of the options. Other experts say that the ramps were around the pyramid, and some say that the ramps were inside the pyramid. Maybe we will never know for sure, and it'll forever remain a mystery. The exterior limestone of the pyramid was polished with sand and stone until it gleamed. On top, there was a gold and silver capstone, which glimmered over Egypt like a second sun. So that's how it was 5,000 years ago. Now, about the interior. Surprisingly, there's not much inside the pyramid. Most of it is just solid stone with very little open space. But let's take a quick look inside. From the entrance, there are 2 stairways, one going down and the other going up. They take us to the chambers. There are 3 of them inside. Now, why is that? Apparently, throughout the whole construction, a burial chamber had to be prepared at all times, just in case a pharaoh kicked the bucket before the construction ended. So separate chambers were built one after another as the construction progressed. The last of them was the main one. It's called the King's Chamber. It's the one where Khufu was resting. It's the biggest room at the very heart of the pyramid, and there's a big passageway leading to it. It was likely used as a kind of elevator to move granite up to build the interior. Granite was also used to make 5 stories of support beams to ensure that the pyramid didn't collapse. And we can see that it worked since it's been standing for centuries. Unfortunately, none of these chambers have hieroglyphs on the walls. If you want to see the writings, you should go to the decorated tombs near the pyramids. Those pieces of art are depiction of ancient Egypt's culture and daily life. The texts allow researchers to study their language and grammar. The treasures that once were in the pyramids have been taken by people. There are also many secret tunnels and passages inside the pyramids, but even today, no one knows the whole plan of the interior. Scientists have been sending little robots with cameras inside for many years, but there's still a lot we don't know about the pyramids. Now they're trying to use an X-ray to scan the pyramids from the outside without going inside. So yeah, ancient Egyptians did create a mystery no one has been able to crack for 5,000 years already. It's nighttime, and you're about to walk inside Pharaoh Tutankhamun's final resting place. You know, King Tut. You don't have a torch, but at least you came with a flashlight. You walk down several flights of stairs and observe how the walls are carved in hieroglyphics and what looks like a spell. Those who take anything from this place will be doomed for life, the spell says. Even if you don't really believe it, this scares you a little bit. You find a huge stone door. Is it a trap? You manage to open it, but oh no, it's only an empty chamber. You check your map. It seems like you're heading in the right direction. After what feels like hours, you realize you must be trapped inside a labyrinth. You try to retrace your steps, but you can't find the door where you came in from anymore. That's it, you think to yourself. You've fallen for the Pharaoh's trap. What's worse, you didn't bring a lunch. Okay, so we've all seen Hollywood movies where the main character is exploring ancient ruins and faces some seriously dangerous traps, right? We've been told Egyptian royalty protected their final resting places with venomous scorpions and snakes, sliding doors that will trap you for life, and giant rolling boulders that will crush anyone on their paths. The thing is, were these traps truly real? Well, I regret to be the one to break it to you, but this is all fiction. These elaborate traps were too technologically advanced for ancient civilizations to pull off. That is not to say, however, that there weren't any traps at all. Ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians and the Mayans, are known for their practice of building entire monuments dedicated to the ones who had passed away. These structures would often reflect the position of person occupied in society. So, for the really important people, the VIPs of their times, massive monuments were built to host their bodies long after they were gone. Some of these civilizations believed that a person's life would continue on the other side of the veil. For that reason, A person would be buried together with the belongings of their current life. If they had a lot of money and power and stuff, that meant their resting places would be filled with riches and gold. Now imagine if you lived in ancient Egypt and you knew exactly where all the pharaohs' tombs were located and had heard rumors of the amount of wealth kept in these places. Maybe you would be tempted to go check it out, right? We're talking about large rooms filled from floor to ceiling with golden artifacts, jewels, and even money. I mean, it does sound tempting. And since there weren't any security guards protecting the entrance of these places, Egyptians needed to get creative as to how they would protect these riches. These old civilizations found some traps to be useful. A recurring one was building empty rooms inside the monument to confuse a burglar. Now, let's take a look at Amenhotep III's final resting place as an example. It was built in the city of Luxor, in a spot also known as the Western Valley of the Kings. Two French engineers originally discovered the monument between 1905 and 1914 CE. The structure is huge and has more than 10 chambers, connected by long corridors and steep stairways. The King's Chamber is the most hidden one, and for an outsider to try and find it, they will probably enter a lot of empty rooms beforehand. Other pharaohs tried to protect their riches by commissioning monuments with false doors concealing pits that were up to 20 feet deep. This way, an unwarned and unwanted visitor would be surprised by the deep hole on their way to the king's resting chamber. Alongside false doors, pharaohs made sure to build labyrinth-style corridors and false walls. This way, robbers could take hours or days before they found the king's real chamber. As to pits with poisonous snakes on them, if there were any reptiles inside these monuments, they probably got inside on their own and would most likely not stay there for long. There is no way snakes would survive years and years without food inside these pits. So yes, another Hollywood-induced belief right there. If these traps seem boring to you, archaeologists did find an interesting deterrent in the final resting place of the Red Queen of Palenque in Mexico. Palenque was one of the most powerful Mayan cities in pre-Columbian Mexico, and the Red Queen was believed to be the grandmother of the last Mayan king, undoubtedly a person of immense importance to the empire. In her honor, a huge monument was built to keep her body after her passing. The discovery of the tomb itself was already thrilling. Archaeologists found an ancient monument when digging at the site back in 1994. The first thing they found was a room with a hidden door. Once they opened the door, they discovered a long corridor. Finally, at the end of this corridor was the Queen's chamber. The team of archaeologists was beyond excited to unearth this chamber with the mummy of the Queen herself still inside it. They found her to be accompanied by her pearls, jade shells, and expensive rocks. But as the team explored the remains, they saw something rather strange. The room was filled with a red-colored powder. Researchers knew that the color red was important to the Mayan people, and that much of their clothing and buildings were decorated with this color. But they didn't understand why the queen was buried with this unknown red substance. After they took a sample back with them for further analysis, they discovered that the red powder was cinnabar, a very dangerous mineral. This powder, when inhaled, can cause, shall we say, severe health damage to a person. The team concluded that this could only be a trap for anyone trying to steal her riches. Okay, so dangerous powders might have worked as the most intense traps we've seen until now. But perhaps the cheapest way to keep out unwanted visitors was to advertise spells written out all over the monument. We'd probably laugh at these today, but back in the day, they were more or less effective. Spells usually said that the person who took anything from that place would meet a tragic fate. Some spells said that robbers would lose their houses in big fires or terrible floods. Other spells said burglars would have incurable and undiagnosed health issues, but they weren't really enough to stop people from taking any gold. There are some stories surrounding how these spells might have been real. One of them is from the famous British Egyptologist Howard Carter, the one responsible for unearthing Pharaoh Tutankhamun's resting place in the 1920s. After months of unsuccessful digging, Carter discovered the tomb's existence by chance. He found the entrance to a stairway right beneath the soil where he had been searching all those months. With the help of a team, he cleared the piles of sand blocking the stairs and discovered a doorway. The door had several royal symbols carved into it, and Carter knew this could only mean a very important person had been buried there. And he was right. With a chisel, he made a hole in the top left-hand corner of the doorway and lit his vision with the help of a candle. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, the reflection of several golden and jeweled items crowding the chamber before him. Lost for 3,000 years, Carter had just discovered the final resting place of King Tut. But the story didn't finish here. This discovery was accompanied by a series of unfortunate events that led people to believe it had something to do with the pharaoh's spell. Carter himself mysteriously passed away just a few years later, and some of his assistants lost their houses in floods, just like one of the spells threatened. Some say it's just coincidental, as there's no real proof of these things being connected. Well, what do you think? Was this an effective trap after all?
You have heard about Nikola Tesla. You have definitely heard about the Great Pyramids in Egypt. But what if I told you that Tesla may have probably uncovered the ancient mysteries surrounding the pyramids? Wait, what? Is this a crossover episode? Nope. It's highly probable that the secrets of the pyramids are hidden in plain sight. But first, let's recap what we know about the pyramids. What's so mysterious about them? I mean, they are just old quirky buildings, aren't they? One of the biggest questions is how they were built. Some people think that the pyramids were created by people using only their hands and muscles. But others think that there might have been some kind of crazy energy source that we don't know about yet. Like, what if aliens helped out or something? Just kidding. But this idea of some unknown energy source being used to build the pyramids has been around for ages. Even in old texts, like the pyramid texts, it talks about how the gods gave us something to build a great power. So maybe there was something really powerful and mysterious going on back then? Who knows? Back in the early 1900s, he got obsessed with the Great Pyramids of Egypt. He read numerous books about these ancient structures and was blown away by how much energy they seemed to have. At that time, not many people knew much about electricity, and Tesla started to wonder if there was some kind of advanced tech hidden in the pyramids. He had an idea that the power of the pyramids had to do with electromagnetism, and he put a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out the mystery. Tesla had some pretty unusual theories about the Great Pyramids. He thought that they could actually store and move electricity, which could then be used to power up the areas around them. He also had this theory that the pyramids were built using some kind of crystal energy. He believed that the chambers inside the pyramids could have these super powerful crystals that could control the electromagnetic fields. But that's not all. Tesla also had this idea that the materials used to make the pyramids had properties that allowed them to trap energy from the sun and the moon. And not just a little bit of energy. He thought that the pyramid could actually create this massive energy field that could light up whole cities or even brighten up dark places. He thought that the pyramids could be used as giant power plants to generate electricity and run machines. Tesla even believed that the pyramids were somehow linked to cosmic energy, which could be used for spiritual enlightenment and healing. How very new age of him. Anyway, Tesla wasn't just pulling these ideas out of thin air. He was seriously into studying everything he could about the pyramids, from ancient artifacts and texts to hieroglyphs and drawings. And he came up with this idea that the pyramids were designed to be energy amplifiers, and some kind of unknown energy source was used during their construction. Some people thought Tesla was eccentric for coming up with these theories, but his ideas have actually had a huge impact on the way we think about the pyramids today. Researchers and scholars have been digging into his theories for years, and using them to uncover some of the biggest mysteries surrounding these ancient structures. For example, recently scientists have used theoretical physics to investigate how the Great Pyramid of Egypt would react to certain radio waves. They found out that if the radio waves were a certain length, the pyramid could concentrate the energy inside its rooms and focus it under its base. The scientists did lots of calculations to figure this out. They first thought about what radio wavelengths would work best. Then they made a model of how the pyramid would react to the waves. They figured out how much of the energy from the waves would get absorbed or spread out. Lastly, they checked how the energy would move around inside the pyramid when the waves hit it. To help explain all of this, the scientists used something called multipole analysis. This is when you take a complicated object and break it down into simpler parts. Then you can see how each part interacts with the energy that's coming in. It's like taking apart a puzzle to see how each piece fits together. The researchers are interested in how all of this can be used in the future. They want to make really tiny particles that can do the same thing as the pyramid, but with light. By changing the size, shape, and the material of these particles, they can control how the light moves around them. This can be really useful for things like making tiny sensors or super efficient solar cells. The scientists had to make some guesses when they were doing their research. They assumed that there weren't any hidden spaces inside the pyramid, and that the material used to build it was all the same. But even with these guesses, they still made some pretty impressive discoveries. But the pyramid study is not the only proof that Tesla was ahead of his time. There are more Tesla's projects that seemed unrealistic at the time, but that scientists and enthusiasts reevaluate and try to implement today. Let's talk about Tesla's most ambitious project, the Wardenclyffe Transmission Tower. Back in 1900, Tesla was already a big shot when it came to electrical engineering in America. People were blown away by his amazing inventions and the fact that he managed to outdo Thomas Edison in the Battle of Currents. However, Tesla wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He decided to embark on his most ambitious project yet, the transmission tower at Wardenclyffe. It was built between 1901 and 1905, and it was based on one of Tesla's breakthrough ideas. He had a vision to make the impossible possible by creating a global wireless communication system. It would use Earth itself as a conductor, transmitting music, news, stock market reports, secured military communications, and even facsimile images. Does it sound familiar? Right, it sounds just like the internet that we use today, only without the use of any wires. But Tesla had a much bigger dream in mind, to transmit power wirelessly. He already proved that high-frequency signals could be sent without any wires using his Tesla coil transformers, and this sparked his obsession with wireless energy transmission. His vision was to not only transform the way we communicate, but also to find a way to transfer power currents globally by tapping into the Earth's natural energy. Tesla believed that there was an abundance of free energy all around us that could be used for humanity's benefit. In 1899, he conducted some top-secret experiments and got convinced that it was possible to transmit electrical power through the Earth's upper atmosphere. This is actually how the Wardenclyffe Tower was created. It was supposed to be the prototype station for a network of towers all over the globe that would provide the whole world with wireless energy. Unfortunately, Tesla didn't have the resources or the patience of his investors to bring this project to fruition. It ran into all sorts of financial problems and roadblocks, and in 1917, the unfinished tower was finally torn down for scrap metal to pay off Tesla's mounting debts. Now it remains a sad reminder that even the greatest minds can sometimes fall short of their dreams. The original red brick laboratory, however, is still there, and it is the only Tesla lab that has survived. Fun fact, in 2017, a film crew made a crazy discovery. They used ground-penetrating radar to explore the area around Wardenclyffe, and they found a whole series of tunnels stretching for hundreds of feet underneath the site. Nobody knows exactly what these tunnels were used for, but people have been speculating for years that they were part of Tesla's grand plan. Wardenclyffe, of course, is a major landmark for Tesla enthusiasts from all over the world. Who knows? Maybe someone will finally crack the mystery of the tunnels one day. But even if they don't, the legacy of Tesla and his amazing ideas lives on.
2 centuries ago, a 31-year-old Frenchman stormed into his brother's office in Paris. He had only one thing to share: "I've got it!" The man was so excited that he immediately collapsed. He spent the next 5 days in bed recovering his health. Who was this mysterious person, and why was he so thrilled? Jean-François Champollion made one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history. He had cracked the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This enabled scientists to finally unravel the secrets of this ancient civilization. They weren't able to read hieroglyphs for nearly 2,000 years. After the Romans took over Egypt, the intricate writing system slowly faded away from people's minds. The last of the hieroglyphic texts date back to the 4th century. For thousands of years, Egyptians used images to show their lives. But the knowledge of how to read these pictures was lost to modern science. The story of hieroglyphs began in 3250 before current era. That's when ancient Egyptians developed writing. Their motivation was to better organize the distribution and storage of goods. One of the earliest examples is a ceramic jar that had an inscription in black ink. There were 2 major writing systems. The first were the hieroglyphs, which literally means sacred carving. Egyptians carved hieroglyphs in stone on temples, tombs, and similar monuments for 3,000 years. They present a system of pictorial texts. A pictograph is a picture or a drawing that stands for an idea of a word. It's a precursor to the true writing as we have it today. For example, when Egyptians wanted to write ibis, they would draw a small image of the bird. Hieroglyphs can be found on walls. They were a formal way of writing. The other writing system was hieratic. Egyptians mostly used it when writing on papyrus. That's an early, thicker form of the paper we have today. It soon evolved into demotic. This improved version became the most common writing systems in ancient Egypt. Then, in the early 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great took control of Egypt. This was the time when the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty ruled the country. You've probably heard of the last ruler of this dynasty, Cleopatra. During her time, Egyptian Demotic and Greek were used side by side. The two started mixing, and by the year 100, a new language emerged, Coptic. It slowly replaced the ancient writing system. Only Egyptian priests used hieroglyphs for the next couple of centuries, and then their meaning was lost to history. But not forever. Arabs were the first who tried to solve the mystery of the hieroglyphs. Medieval travelers came across these strange symbols and wanted to understand their meaning. They consulted speakers of Coptic and translated text from Greek and Latin into Arabic to break the code of the hieroglyphs. During the Renaissance, Europeans also became fascinated with the legacy of ancient Egypt. Scholars from the Old Continent believed that hieroglyphs were a group of symbols as opposed to a written language. This was all about to change in 1799. A year earlier, Napoleon, the famous French ruler, arrived in Egypt. His subordinates constructed a fort that dated back to the 15th century. Rashid, or Rosetta, was a port town in the northeast of Egypt, near Alexandria. One section of the old fortification wall contained an interesting slab inside. The stone tablet was made of a granite-like rock. It was just 40 inches high and 30 inches wide. It contained 3 distinctive sections of text carved into it. The letters were in 3 scripts and 2 languages: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. It was a fragment of a larger ancient stela. These are upright stone slabs that are used to dedicate to a person or an event, but the one from Rosetta was damaged. 2/3 of the hieroglyphic text on the top was missing. The bottom Greek text lacked a cornerstone. The only fully preserved section was the writing in Demotic in the middle of the slab. It eventually ended up in the British Museum. The scientific community was intrigued, and the race was on to decipher it. Prints and casts of the slab went out all over Europe. Scholars already knew ancient Greek, so in theory, this shouldn't have been so hard. The first people who saw the Rosetta Stone thought the process would take 2 weeks. In the end, it took 2 decades. The main issue was the fact that hieroglyphs and spoken ancient Egyptian didn't have a connection anymore. Scientists didn't know what sounds the letters on the slab corresponded to. Imagine if English disappeared 1,000 years in the future. Then someone finds a tablet with the word dog. At first, they wouldn't know how to read the word or the individual letters. Even if they figured out how to pronounce the word, they wouldn't know its meaning. This is what linguists were dealing with in the case of the Rosetta Stone. The careful study of the artifact produced another find. The texts weren't direct translations of each other. They both described the same event, but in different words. It was like you saw a movie with 2 friends, and then all 3 of you wrote different reviews about it. The original text was probably in Greek, but the translators added extra words to make it sound more Egyptian. An English physician and physicist, Thomas Young, made the first great breakthrough. He knew that the name Ptolemy appeared several times in the text based on the Greek translation. This wasn't an Egyptian name, so it was impossible to represent it with a single image. The only way to spell out this Greek name was to use symbols that sound like it when produced. This is called transliteration, and we have it today as well. This is how foreign-sounding words are written down in Chinese or some Slavic languages. Young focused on sets of hieroglyphs in oval frames. These are called cartouches. He experimented a bit but finally discovered that one of them read, Ptolemy the Great. The individual hieroglyphs that made up this name corresponded to sounds needed to produce it. This is where our mysterious man from the beginning of the video enters the picture. Champollion picked up where Young left off. He knew Coptic, so the Frenchman was able to determine what many other hieroglyphs sounded like. The eureka moment was close. It came while he was studying a cartouche from a site dedicated to Ramses II. It had 4 symbols. The last 2 were the same. He determined this was the sound S. The first symbol was the sun. This is Ra or Re in Coptic. So the cartouche read Ra something SS. Can you already guess the name? Of course, it's Ramses. This breakthrough finally cracked the code. Ancient Egyptian wasn't a mishmash of cool-looking images. It was a phonetic language that Jean-François Champollion discovered in September of 1822. The stone slab is today known as the Decree of Memphis. The Egyptian Council issued it in this city in the year 196 before current era. In it, they expressed their loyalty to the pharaoh. They erected identical stelae in temples all across Egypt. The Rosetta Stone was just one copy of them, but its content is less important than the fact that Champollion's translation gave these ancient peoples their voice again. During the 1800s, European scholars didn't think that the Egyptian civilization was much older than classical Greek or Roman. Now that scientists could read hieroglyphs, a whole new chapter of human history opened. One of the most famous finds in the history of archaeology happened in 1922. That's when the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The whole world admired King Tut's golden mask. But without Champollion's pioneering work, it would be impossible to know who its owner was. The young pharaoh's cartouche is phonetic. For instance, you pronounce the pictograph of a chick as the vowel U. The symbol for the key of life is an ankh, and there is a shepherd's crook in the end. It symbolizes the word ruler.
The Great Pyramid was created as the final resting place of ancient Egyptian monarch Khufu. According to legend, French leader Napoleon entered the Great Pyramid and came back out looking shaken and super pale. He never revealed what he saw inside, but whatever it was is said to have affected him for the rest of his life. When Napoleon entered the pyramid, he would have walked through a super tight and ascending passageway. He'd then go through another passageway, known as the Great Chamber. This corridor would have been much taller than the previous one, and would have cobbles too. He'd then reach the King's Chamber, the centerpiece of the Great Pyramid, which was lined with huge blocks of granite. But it wouldn't have looked as grand as we might imagine. There are no hieroglyphics decorating its walls, as Egyptians only began decorating the burial chambers of pyramids much later on. The pharaoh's tombs deep inside the pyramid would have also been filled with treasures, from chunks of gold to the world's most expensive jewelry. But this would have all been looted a long time ago. The only thing that probably would have been left in there would have been a huge sarcophagus, which would have once contained the king's mummy. He'd also have to walk past the queen's chamber. This room most likely didn't hold any queens though, as pyramids were usually only built for one person. There are mysterious tunnels leading from here. To this day, no one is really sure what they're there for. And that's not the only mysterious and creepy thing Napoleon may have encountered, as stories of pharaohs leaving ancient curses on pyramids go way back. Many pyramids had warnings written on the outside, telling of horrifying things that would happen to those who entered and disturbed the peace. We might not know what exactly Napoleon found in the Great Pyramid that scared him so much, but we know for sure what was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Tutankhamun was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh who was only 8 or 9 years old when he took to the throne. He became a cultural phenomenon when his tomb was discovered almost completely intact in 1922. His pyramid sits in the Valley of Kings in Thebes, modern Luxor, which is in Egypt. Unlike the Great Pyramid, Tutankhamun's tomb was covered in beautiful wall decorations. The walls told the story of how he would travel to the afterlife through the underworld. Egyptians believed all people would have to take this journey, so they would fill their tombs with objects and paintings to help them get there. There'd also be spells painted on the walls. They believed this would help people pass over to the next realm. The journey would be pretty long, and for that reason, the ancient Egyptians would also fill the pyramids with food. Tutankhamun's pyramid was filled with 8 fruit baskets. They even found something called gingerbread fruit in there. The rooms were jam-packed with furniture, statues, clothes, and staffs, amongst a whole bunch of other things. You'd likely find a lot of clothes and expensive jewelry in the pyramids as well. The ancient Egyptians wanted their ancestors to travel in style to the afterlife. They put Tutankhamun in his final resting place with over 50 pieces of clothing, all of the highest quality. There were tunics, scarves, gloves, and headdresses, and a ton of jewelry. Bracelets, pendants, necklaces, rings, and scarabs for protection were all found inside. Each of them was made of gold or precious stones. There were also fans made of ostrich feathers to keep the old pharaoh cool in the hot Egyptian sun. But the temperature inside the pyramids never actually went above 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The ancient Egyptians developed a super cool air conditioning system that we don't fully understand even today. Tutankhamun's pyramid also contained 130 walking sticks made from ebony, ivory, silver, and gold to help him on his journey. There were 3 chariots hidden away in case he got tired of all the walking. They also put 11 boat paddles inside, but there was no sign of any boat. The pyramids would be littered with the pharaoh's favorite scents and perfumes. During the excavation of Tutankhamun's pyramid, it quickly became clear that it had been robbed during ancient times. There was damage to doors and traces of oils left in empty jars. It looks like someone raided the pyramid for gold and the scents, perfumes, and oils that had been left for King Tut. There was still a bit of perfume, which was made from coconut oil and frankincense, left in one bottle. It seems like Pharaoh Tutankhamun loved board games. There was an ivory traveling set of Senet in his pyramid. Although we don't know for sure exactly how to play it, we have figured out it was sort of an ancient Egyptian version of backgammon. It looks like it was a 2-player game where the goal was to knock your opponent off the board. Not really sure who Tutankhamun's mummy was supposed to play with though. The ancient Egyptians had some rituals that may seem pretty strange to us. For example, they used to shave their eyebrows off if they ever lost a cat. So it's not too surprising they put some really weird things inside pyramids. Archaeologists discovered a collection of mummified cats and scarab beetles in pyramids that date back more than 4,000 years. They were found in the pyramids of Saqqara, which is south of Cairo. They also found a bunch of makeup kits and mirrors inside. Makeup was worn proudly by both men and women in ancient Egyptian times. Eyeliner was the most popular cosmetic. The Rosetta Stone was one of the best discoveries ever made in pyramids. It was found by our man Napoleon Bonaparte and his team. It's a black granite rock that dates back to 196 BCE. It's transcribed in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. When it was translated in 1822, we got the key to understanding ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics for the very first time. The discovery of Queen Hatshepsut's mummy in 1903 changed our understanding of the Egyptians forever. After she had passed away, her successor, Thutmose III, removed most of the evidence of her reign, so we basically knew nothing about Egypt's first great female leader. She's now gone on to become one of the few and most famous female pharaohs of Egypt. Pharaoh Khufu even had a fully fledged boat in his pyramid. Archaeologists uncovered more than 1,200 pieces of a giant boat near the Great Pyramid at Giza. They reassembled the boat, and it's a whopping 144 feet long. It's most likely a solar boat, which was designed to carry the resurrected king with the deity Ra. Fun fact, the Pyramid of Giza is the last remaining of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The other 6 are the Hanging Gardens, the Colossus, the Temple of Artemis, the Mausoleum, the Lighthouse, and the Statue of Zeus. This pyramid was also the world's tallest man-made structure for 3,800 years, and it's the biggest pyramid in Egypt. It took a staggering 2.3 million blocks of limestone, and some weighed as much as 80 tons. It took an incredible 100,000 laborers and a whopping 23 years to build. Its original height was a mega 480 feet. In 2017, archaeologists discovered something weird about Egypt's Great Pyramid. There's a hidden void that's at least 100 feet long, and no one really knows why it's there or what's actually inside it. The weird void is the first inner structure discovered within the 4,500-year-old pyramid since the 1800s. Scientists used cosmic rays to detect the massive hole, but are still no closer today to finding out what's inside. The ancient Egyptians took a lot of care building the pyramids, and everything was strategically placed and structurally sound, so it's super unlikely that this hole is due to blocks falling over time. Loads of pyramids also contain small model figurines called ushabti. These represented attendants. They believed they would come to life to serve the pharaohs in the afterlife. But it's amazing that all this stuff actually fit inside. There isn't actually a huge amount of space inside the structures. It's mostly just rock.
And now we're off to almost 5,000 years ago. Let me take you to ancient Egypt, where back in 2550 BC, guess what? The construction of the Great Pyramids of Giza started. People learned to build cathedrals and skyscrapers, but it wasn't until recently that these massive buildings appeared. It's still a mystery to even modern scientists how these pyramids were built 5,000 years ago. No wonder they are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They're also the oldest of them and the only wonder of the ancient world that still exists in the 21st century. It must have taken a lot of cooperation to build a thing that massive, even for today's metrics. But the Giza pyramids weren't the first pyramids ever. The first one, called the Step Pyramid, was built around 80 years before the first pyramid of Giza in 2630 BC for King Djoser. It wasn't meant to be extraordinary, but ended up being quite impressive. It was a pyramid of 6 stepped layers of stone. It was 204 feet high, which is as tall as a 19-story building. And it was the tallest building that existed at that time. It wasn't just a pyramid though, it was surrounded by a whole complex of buildings, including even courtyards. In ancient Egypt, people believed in the afterlife, so everyone, especially kings, wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to get ready for it. Here's why the pyramid complex was perfectly supplied with a lot of objects people used every day. The complex included a pyramid and a kind of a palace. Those buildings had many things the king loved and might need one day, like furniture, food, and gold vessels. After Djoser, building pyramids became common practice, but many pyramids weren't finished. It would usually take about 20 years to build one, but many rulers reigned way less than that. Overall, there are more than 100 pyramids. The most famous pyramids are the Great Pyramids of Giza. The first one and the biggest one was built for Pharaoh Khufu, around 2550 BC. Initially, it was 481 feet tall, which is as tall as a 40-story building. The second pyramid was built for Khufu's son, Pharaoh Khafre, around 2520 BC. It's just a bit shorter, usually standing at 471 feet high, a 39-story building. This is the pyramid with the famous statue of the Sphinx. Sphinxes have a lion's body and a human head. They were built to guard important areas. This one has the head of Pharaoh Khafre and is guarding his pyramid, facing the sunrise. The Sphinx is most well known and is one of the world's biggest and oldest statues. Originally, it had red color and did have a nose. It's still possible to see the trace of red pigment by its ears. But no one knows exactly when the nose disappeared. For some time, the Sphinx was sort of hidden underground, being covered with sand up to its shoulders. Luckily, in the early 1800s, an adventurer with a team of 160 people dug it out. The third pyramid of Giza is the smallest one, being more than twice shorter. Originally, it was 218 feet high, about the height of a 20-story building. Built in 2490 BC, it was a pyramid for Khafre's son, Menkaure. The pyramids are designed to align with the points of the compass, and their sides symbolize the rays of the sun. But back at the time, there were no compasses. Ancient Egyptians figured out the directions themselves, and with amazing precision. To align the pyramids, they used two constellations. Originally, the pyramids were covered in smooth white limestone and had a gold-silver top to reflect the sun. Later, the white limestone was taken from the pyramids by other kings and used for other buildings. Scientists estimated that ancient Egyptians used about 2.3 million stone blocks to build the first pyramid. Each block weighed more than 1 ton. This is the weight of a rhino. Some blocks were even bigger, being almost as heavy as an elephant. 4.5 millennia ago, there was no modern equipment to help build it. There were no machines, no wheels, and even no steel. The only metal available to them was copper. Even today, scientists aren't sure how the Egyptians managed to build the pyramids. There are no records left that would shed light on it. Some even think that Egyptians wanted to keep it as their secret and didn't even record it on purpose. Many believe that poor people and foreigners built the pyramids, but it's not true. Actually, the builders were very skilled workers, and they were fed and paid well. The archaeologists claimed that the builders lived in a nearby temporary city and were a highly organized community with a strong leader. Scientists say that around 20,000 people worked on each pyramid complex, and it took about 20 years to build each. It probably was a national project. The construction site was large in resources, and food and essentials were likely to be contributed from all parts of Egypt. Even with all that support, it remains unclear how people managed to cut, transport, and assemble those huge stones. One of the theories suggests the stones were most likely transported on boats down the Nile River. Then, there was a harder part. They had to be moved to the construction site. For that, they probably used wooden sleds. It wasn't very hard to pull them because the sand mixed with the right amount of water was pretty slick. And 10 people could move a sled even with a rock weighing 1 ton pretty easily. Finally, one last problem. The stones had to be lifted and put into place. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of the ramps system that dates back to when the pyramids were built. Most likely, the Egyptians designed a unique system to move and pull huge stone blocks, but no one knows what it looked like exactly. The most common opinion is that there were several ramps around the pyramid to help move the blocks. The ramp was growing with the pyramid getting higher. They suppose people were walking up the stairs, pulling the stone on the wooden sled up in the middle on the sandy ramp. But this is just one of the options. Others say that the ramps were going around the pyramid. Some say the ramps were inside the pyramid. But we'll never know for sure, and it'll forever remain a mystery, just like the ancient Egyptians wanted. Surprisingly, there's not much inside the pyramids. Most of it is just solid stone with very little open space. But let's take a quick look inside the biggest of the pyramids of Giza. From the entrance, there are two stairs, one going down and the other one going up. The descending one takes you to a chamber located underground. That's where the pharaohs are, but not in this pyramid because Khufu wanted to stay higher. The underground room is partly unfinished. The room with Khufu's sarcophagus is called the King's Chamber. It's upstairs and then through the tall and long Grand Gallery. Below the King's Chamber, there's a room called the Queen's Chamber. There are no queens though, and no one is sure why the room is called this. Unfortunately, none of these have any hieroglyphs on the wall. They're just bare. If you want to see them, you should go to the other rooms that are decorated. Those pieces of art are depictions of ancient Egypt's culture and daily life. The texts allow researchers to study their language and grammar. Sadly, the treasures that once were here in the pyramid are long stolen. From that room, there are several tunnels for an unknown purpose. There are many tunnels and passages inside the pyramids. There are many chambers and shafts and secret ways. Scientists have been sending little robots with cameras there for some decades already. And the robots did discover another chamber a bit upstairs with hieroglyphs on the walls. But even today, much of the pyramids is still unknown, and there's no so-called building plan of the pyramids. Egyptians did create a mystery no one can crack for 4,500 years already. Scientists recently started to X-ray the pyramid to learn what's inside it without entering it and its narrow, mysterious tunnels.
If one of the many apocalyptic scenarios come true and humanity is wiped out completely, a black box will tell whoever comes after us about what has led to that scary day. The 33-foot-long vault in a remote part of western Tasmania is supposed to document all the mistakes humanity has made that led to an apocalypse. The artists, architects, and researchers behind the Earth's black box hope that the art installation made of thick, reinforced steel will withstand fire, water, and any other natural disasters, except probably for total planetary destruction. Just like the black box you can find in planes, this time capsule is supposed to help the next civilization do better and avoid the probable sad and tragic fate of our humanity. The project is fully non-commercial and has an important message. The box will be full of storage drives and have access to the internet. Solar panels on the roof will power it, and batteries will take care of backup power storage. Whenever the sun's out, the black box will be updating itself with new scientific data. A special algorithm will sort it only to save the information relevant to the project. It will be measurements of land and sea temperatures, ocean acidification, species extinction, land use changes, as well as data on human population and energy consumption. The second type of data for the box will be newspaper headlines, social media posts, and news from the key global events focusing on the environment. The creators of the box decided to encode and store data for it in several formats, including binary code. The instructions on how to retrieve all that priceless knowledge would be etched into the outside of the box. Some of the big brains involved in the project are afraid that this could inspire some curious bad guys to break into the box long before it's time to do it. The solar-powered hard drive will have enough space to collect data over 50 years. Even the most pessimistic scientific models don't predict the end of the world any sooner anyway. It might even take centuries before the worst happens. The idea of a box that would record everything that happened before an accident in aviation was born in the middle of the 20th century. Back then, the world's first jetliner, de Havilland's Comet, crashed 7 times over 2 years, taking the lives of 110 people. The Department of Civil Aviation in Australia wanted to find the possible cause of all these crashes. One of these experts was Dr. David Warren, a chemist specializing in aviation fuels. He realized that there was simply not enough data to make any conclusions. There was no one to tell what had really happened before the crash. He remembered seeing a dictaphone that recorded sound on steel wire at a trade fair. Soon, Dr. Warren wrote a memo to his manager offering to design a voice recorder to follow what was going on in the cockpit. It would also record flight data and be stored in a crash-proof container. Flying wasn't a huge thing in Australia back then, so the manager didn't appreciate the idea. Dr. Warren then started working on a prototype in his own garage. He showed the ready device to the secretary of the British Air Registration Board when he was in Australia. He absolutely loved the idea, so later, Dr. Warren got a whole team to help him develop a pre-production prototype. The correct way to call his invention is actually not black box, but flight data recorder, and it's orange, not black. We probably call it black because those gadgets get charred black after a crash. Or maybe because the first boxes were painted that color to prevent reflection. Or because that's the general name scientists use for devices with in and output of data with complex internal workings. So, the flight data recorder consists of two parts: the data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Historically, they were two boxes, but now they're just two cylinders. The data recorder keeps track of such important flight data as engine exhaust, temperature, fuel flow, aircraft velocity, altitude, and rate of descent. The second part records sound in the cockpit to analyze communication with air traffic control in case of an accident. The device only records data for up to 2 hours and then overwrites the previous sounds. Sometimes, the two parts are combined and they look like a box. The devices record data and voices from the cockpit, but they are actually located in the tail end of the aircraft, where the structure of the plane will protect them best in case of a crash. The black box has a locator beacon, which is activated when water gets on it, but it will send out a pulse for 30 days. Search parties use the bright orange color of the recorder as a visual beacon. Sometimes, it takes a long time to find the box, and in some cases, they don't find it at all. Long before the first plane was invented, there was an original black box of planetary meaning, the ancient library of Alexandria. Back in the ancient days, people in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece were no strangers to libraries and archives. But these early institutions were more about preserving local traditions and heritage. The whole concept of a universal library only became a thing when the Greeks started thinking big. They were so impressed by what their neighbors in Egypt were doing that they arranged expeditions to acquire knowledge. Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, seeing that hunger for knowledge required his companions, generals, and scholars to report to him in detail on regions that were previously unmapped. It helped collect plenty of information on geography and contributed to the creation of a great library. Most of the information it had was written in Greek. It had the books of Aristotle as part of the whole corpus of Greek literature. Some sources say that in the hunt for new books, the library's founders would stop every ship sailing into the harbor of Alexandria. If they found books, they would take them to the library. If they decided it was valuable, they'd make a quick copy and return it to the owner with some compensation, leaving the original at the library. Another story tells us that Ptolemy III, grandson of the founder of the library, offered the governors of Athens a huge compensation to copy the original texts of the greatest poets. He then kept the originals and sent them back copies. Once the Roman Empire arrived, they burnt all that knowledge, not thinking that it might lead to their own collapse. There was no easy way of spreading information across the world, so one source had most of the knowledge humanity had accumulated by then. The great minds of those times didn't just fill it with knowledge, but also made important connections, trying to make the best use of that information. If the Library of Alexandria hadn't burnt, we could have gotten some priceless knowledge about the people who had lived before the current era. Some scientists believe that big data could have saved the Vikings that had settled in Greenland many centuries ago. It might have also helped the Easter Island civilization to identify and address problems caused by volcanic activity, latitude, and rainfall patterns, and restore soil fertility. They say that a typical person living today is exposed to as much data in one day as someone in the 15th century would learn in their entire lifetime. And there's a theory that every papyrus scroll on the whole Library of Alexandria could probably fit onto an ordinary flash drive you have in your pocket. There's so much big data generated every day that it might do us more harm than good because of a huge information overload. We're moving towards a global civilization, so if all that knowledge disappears, we lose not one empire, but the entire world.
Listen to this. Neanderthal fiber technology. Nope, I'm not joking. The concept is real. In 2020, a team of scientists published a paper that redefined the way we saw our closest ancestors. A find in France changed archaeology forever, and it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But let me start from the beginning. Neanderthals. For a long time, they fit the image of the typical cavemen. If you are now thinking of someone like Fred Flintstone, you wouldn't be much wrong. What was the reason behind this stereotype? When did we start believing that Neanderthals were not the brightest tools in the shed of evolution? In comes William King, a 19th century British geologist. He was the man who named the Neanderthals. Based on the bones King found, the scientist declared the species not intelligent, and this image stuck with the Neanderthals for centuries to come. But a piece of string, just a quarter of an inch long, changed everything. A small, dry river valley, Abri du Maras, was the place of the great find. Archaeologists unearthed a cord fragment next to a stone tool. Such twisted fibers could have been used for everything from making clothes to fishing nets. In prehistory, this was some advanced tech, and the Neanderthals seemed to have mastered it. Scientists already knew that these early humans made tar from birch bark, and that they produced shell beads. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art. They were definitely not primitive. The string section and similar finds are changing the way we perceive our ancestors. The world of archaeology is constantly changing. Take the pyramids in Egypt, for example. Turns out, they weren't really built by an army of people who the pharaoh made work until they passed out. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was the man who started the confusion. He claimed, in 500 BCE, that 100,000 men took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza. He made no mention of who they were and why they were building the pyramids. That's how the myth started. Huge stone slabs pulled by humans, driven by a foreman with a whip. But Egyptologists would beg to differ. Those are the scientists who study ancient Egypt's culture. Fairly recently, they uncovered a workers' village that told a different tale. Yes, there was evidence of hard work on the workers' bones, but the construction industry is demanding even today. It took almost 6 years for 12,000 workers to complete the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. Back in Egypt, 3 times more workers finished the Great Pyramid in around 2 decades. An impressive feat of ancient engineering, wouldn't you agree? Superiors looked well after the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Their diet was rich in protein. They had medical care and they got paid properly. In fact, they lived better than the non-working population. And they lived with their families near the construction site. Archaeologists know all this because they unearthed bakeries and dormitories with bread jars and other goodies. Looks like the pharaohs were okay employers after all, and the job market wasn't that terrible. They also kept detailed papyrus records of the build and hieroglyphs. You and I wouldn't stand a chance of reading these letters that resemble images. Egyptologists had the same problem. For over a millennium, no one had used this type of font. And it's not like there was an English ancient Egyptian dictionary you could open and find meanings of words. But all this changed in 1822. A couple of decades before, the French found a broken slab of black granite. The stone contained one text in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic. The last one was also the Egyptian language, but in a simplified script. Scientists dated it back to 196 BCE. The content is a religious proclamation. A French philologist and Orientalist, Jean-François Champollion, was the first one to crack the code. You see, people haven't forgotten ancient Greek letters. The Frenchman successfully matched the Greek letters with the ones in the Egyptian script. And voila, we were finally able to read hieroglyphs. The name of the piece of granite that made it all possible was the Rosetta Stone. The importance of its discovery went beyond archaeology. The word Rosetta Stone even entered the English dictionary. It represents a discovery that helps people understand an enigma that has been puzzling them for a long time. There are similar games. A symbol is attached to a particular message. Then you have to decode the message by replacing the symbol with a corresponding letter. In a nutshell, this is what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone more than 2 centuries ago. Do you know what is the oldest deciphered language in Europe? It has an unattractive name, Linear B. The script belongs to the Mycenaean Greek language. It predates the ancient Greek alphabet by several centuries. You can easily guess which script it is descended from. Linear A. The people from Crete used Linear B more than 1,000 years ago. During the Late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used the script vanished. There was no one who could read Linear B, and more importantly, no one knew it existed in the first place. This was about to change during the first years of the 20th century. A British archaeologist by the name of Sir Arthur Evans excavated a vast palace complex at Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan culture that created the enigmatic script. The palace boasted some 1,300 rooms. They had colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. All of these captivated the archaeologists' imagination. But their biggest find was at first overlooked. Thousands of slabs of baked clay. The fire that brought down the palace helped preserve the tablets. It was impossible to read the slabs, though. They were written in an unknown language. The scientific community had to wait for another half a century before Michael Ventris cracked the code. He was an English architect and cryptographer. Ventris studied Greek and Latin. While attending the famous Archaeologists lecture, the young man decided to solve the puzzle of Linear B once and for all. He managed to do so in 1952. One of Ventris's most amazing discoveries was that the script was an archaic form of Greek. But cryptology still hasn't solved the code of Linear A. This writing system will remain a mystery until a motivated young person like Michael Ventris comes along. They wouldn't have to be a professional archaeologist. Basil Brown certainly wasn't. Yet in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval tomb in Europe. This happened in Sutton Hoo in the southeast of England. This wasn't an ordinary tomb made out of stone. It was a full-size ship, 3 times as long as a London double-decker bus. And that's not all. Apart from its main purpose, the ship was full of riches. Deluxe hanging bowls, feasting vessels, gold and dress accessories, and luxurious textiles were just some of the treasures found. Archaeologists were also amazed by the silverware from distant Byzantium. You probably know this city as Istanbul, Turkey. Even in our age, it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how much time and money it cost to import a silver plate in the 7th century. That's when the ship went down, according to archaeologists. The English couldn't have done it. At that time, there was no England. The people living in the British Isles at the time were the Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the ship from the grassy mounds in Suffolk belonged to one of their kings? We will never know. The local acidic soil did away with any possible evidence, or no one laid there in the first place. It could have been a cenotaph, which is a monument constructed to honor an important person. The archaeologists still don't have a definite answer. But what they have found at Sutton Hoo shed light on the Dark Ages. Before the discovery of the ship, they knew little about what had been going on in Britain after the Romans left. Now, the image of the early Anglo-Saxon society was much clearer. Perhaps the English soil will be the site of the next great breakthrough in archaeology.
It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Saqqara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Saqqara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes, though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane, but this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oupart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history.